So welcome to From the Studio, our podcast with stories from the world of product design and more. I'm your host, Nick Bramley. I'm delighted to be joined by co-host Richard Hall, but more delighted that our podcast guest today is Neville Young. Neville is Director of Enterprise and Innovation at Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Network. That's a hell of a title, must have a very big business card. Let's explore that in a bit more detail. So without further ado, welcome Richard and welcome Neville.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi. So let's crack on, shall we? Let's get straight into this, Neville. Great job title, great business that you work for. One of the questions I've got is about advancements in digital innovation. It's been said that over the last 18 months, we've advanced digital innovation, probably over 10 years worth of advancement. First of all, is that true? Is that becoming an urban myth that we see a lot of? And if it has been true, how the hell have you managed it?
I think that is a really good question. I think from my position in the AHSN, we're an organisation really interested in driving the adoption of new innovative technology into the NHS. That question's come up a few times, and it's an interesting question in itself. I don't think it's entirely true, but there's some truth in it. I think the truth of the matter is more digital health technology has gone into the NHS and been used in the NHS in the last 18 months than in the previous 10 years. But I'm not sure all of that technology has been brand new over the last 18 months. I think a lot of the technology that's gone in has been around for a while, but not been used at scale. And actually what the pandemic has allowed us to do, or created a sort of a permissive environment in the NHS to do, is to do adoption at scale. So technologies that were maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years old that have been plugging away in a couple of organizations for a number of years and have struggled to spread, have rapidly spread across the whole country. And I think that's the truth. So I think that's a good thing, but because it's paving a way for the next generation of those digital technologies. We'll probably get into that as we go along this afternoon. So I think it's more a case of the stuff that was there is now more readily available and used, but we need more new stuff to come along. Innovation doesn't stop, as we all know. And I think there is a pathway now for the next generation of digital innovation in those spaces.
Excellent. So it's not quite been like the Wild West. It's been, it's quite easy for the press to pick up on stats and then make them sort of out of kilter a little bit. So it's not been so much the Wild West as a change in attitude towards adoption based on essentials, really, in some respects.
I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's a needs must scenario over the last 18 months. We've needed to do things differently, and that's driven good practice that's been established elsewhere. And patients should be reassured because of that, because that good practice that was established has things like patient safety and data safety and information governance at its heart. So I think a lot of the spread that's gone on has been in products that are well established, that we know are safe, that are probably now ready for their next iterations and evolution. And those companies, because they've been able to build a business base at scale, should be able to afford a lot of that investment to reinvigorate those products and bring the next versions to the market. And we're really looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
Excellent. Another question around that whole sort of piece, really, and your role in seeking out and enabling technologies that are viable, have a future. How do you differentiate those that are likely to be successful, and also where the scale of development can be attractive to the health service in the UK? What sort of processes do you go to seek out successful technologies?
Gosh, that's another tricky question. I think there's nobody who gets that question right 100% of the time with 100% of the innovators. I think we've all seen something that we thought wouldn't work that turns out to be, a fantastic innovation. And I think we're all guilty at times of that. But having said that, I think as an HSN network, we've got better and better at that over the years. I think we always ask the first question is, what is the clinical need that this innovation is trying to address? Is there actually a need for it? And to be fair, we see fewer and fewer innovations coming to us that are looking for a problem. That seems to be something that we see less of, which is a good thing. And what we really want to test initially is there a problem in the NHS, in the health sector, that this innovation can address? Now, that's just the first question. If the answer to that is yes, we could start getting into the nuts and bolts of it a little bit more. And as I said, we'll probably get into that a little bit more detail as well. But I think the HSN sees itself very much as a bridge between the commercial community and the NHS and the health sector community. And I think that allows us that neutral space to ask of both parties, both the health providers and the innovators, those awkward questions about matching needs to solutions and trying to get that right. And sometimes that's about the innovators going away and having a think and repointing their offer and coming back to us. But that's a good iterative process to be in. But it's really that first question: is there a need? And if there is, let's take it to the next step.
Excellent. Richard, what's your view on sort of the current pace of innovation, digital and obviously in physical products, which is where PDM spend more time than they do with sort of app development, etc. Sustainable, or lots of noise from lots of things that simply might not make it because there seems to be potentially a bandwagon of adoption that people think, oh, I'll jump on the back of that because there's money or because of COVID or whatever. What's your view on it?
Good question. I think that we are living in interesting times. We've got this thing called Industry 4.0 coming down the tracks, which is the fourth industrial revolution. So I think that's going to transform things in terms of digitization. So I think that's coming down at a real pace, and it's becoming very mature and very usable. So things like artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, connectivity, and so on. I think there's going to be a paradigm shift due to COVID with things that's been mentioned before in terms of telehealth. But in answer to your question, I think that they are sustainable and they are here to stay. However, I think it's the role of innovators and innovation to establish which should be developed and for the right reasons.
Okay, I'm going to follow that up with Neville, really, particularly on the digital side of things. There appear to be apps for virtually everything these days, and it seems to be the first port of call for people who will create an app for that. How do you filter what might be a great health tech app? And do you do that early, or is there a development plan where you say, look, there's a phase 1, but we're not making any decisions until we've seen phase 2, 3 or 4? How is app technology being assessed by people such as yourselves then, Neville?
Well, you're right, Nick. There's a challenge out there. There's a volume challenge, isn't it? There's an app for everything these days, isn't there? But I think in the health space, again, it's very hard to pick the apps that will fly off the shelves and really deliver health benefits for patients at a cost-effective level for the NHS. But those are the sorts of questions that we have to ask. So I think things that we look for, for example, is if you're an app developer and you're working in the health space, have you used the nice evidence standards for digital health to help you bring your product to where it is, even if it's only a minimal viable product? Are you aware of some of the health IG and data challenges that are out there, and have you tried to address those? Have you involved patients in the design of your app? Have they been involved and have they done some testing of what you're developing? And that's all on top of after asking them the initial question is there a need for this in the NHS? So I think those are some guides and tips I think that we would look to. I think health apps that seem to have a success, there aren't tons of them out there, dare I say it. I think what patients want, I'm being speculative here, is they want a return on investment with an app that is related to the number of clicks they've got to put into it to get anything out of it. So nobody wants to spend half an hour a day answering 103 questions about their health to get a 3-line output that says don't eat any Mars bars tonight. I think patients want high value return on their time that they invest into interacting with an app. And if you look at the gaming industry, that's kind of how that works as well. It's you put inputs in and you get high value returns. And I think that's really important as well for developers to be thinking in that space. We see a lot of apps where, people ask patients for lots and lots of data and that it doesn't give them a really high value return. Disengagement happens very quickly. And I guess in terms of governance systems that are out there, we've touched on that as well. There are organizations out there that we work with. There's one called Orca, very well established in the UK, that do a lot of that, provide a lot of that assurance to the NHS that an app has addressed some of the governance issues that need to be addressed in a productive way. And again, we're happy to work with them and work with other developers to seek that assurance that the apps that are coming our way meet the standards that we expect of them before we get them as far as the NHS and patients.
So it is a bit drilling down, isn't it? After the obvious first question, does this address a requirement?
Yes.
Then there's the drilling down, which is interesting. I'll go to Richard. Richard, I know in terms of product development, you're a fan of the, kill it early, kill it cheaply approach if it's not got viability and the commercial reality is not there, particularly around product innovation. Is that true for digital, or would you say there's a bit more experimental leeway because there's less, I'm assuming to a certain extent, there's less investment in a non-physical product than there is in for a digital solution? What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that post-COVID, the patient journey has been somewhat modified, and I think it's here to stay. So by this, I'm referring to things like telehealth and online consultations. But with the technologies becoming mature, I think there needs to be a focus on things like preventive medicine. So examples of this are things like nutrition, so health, because we all know that if we can prevent people being poorly in the first place, that's going to be a net benefit in the long term. So I think, in answer to your question, I think there'll be a blend of physical products and digital products. Things like wearables to monitor vital signs. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, with Industry 4.0, I think that the blend of digitization and physical products are going to take healthcare more to the patient. So patient-centered healthcare, I think that's where it's going to be.
Okay. Neville, the NHS is obviously massive. It's a massive market for those who are in health tech innovation, and obviously that gets people excited. But even if you've got a great product, it does appear to be quite challenging to get into the right places with the right people and get on the NHS radar. Has COVID made that harder? Has it made it easier? What are the challenges that people face if they've got a great potential health tech product and the NHS is their target market?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of money spent on health tech in the NHS every year. I think it's something like £6 billion a year spent in the UK on health tech in various shapes or forms in the NHS. It's still a tough market to crack. And I think a piece of advice for a health tech innovator is don't rely on the NHS as your only market. It may be a springboard into other markets beyond our own shores. But having said that, it's a valuable market to crack. It's still got an element of kudos internationally. NHS, an NHS customer is still valuable. I think over the last 18 months, the routes of entry into the NHS have changed. I think I'm not saying they're easier. I think they're still challenging. I think we'd recommend for any innovator in this space to go and talk to your local HSN. There are 15 of us covering the whole of England. So go and talk to your local HSN. There have been various moves to create procurement frameworks that innovators can get onto a little bit more easily. They're a bit more dynamic. So dynamic procurement systems and dynamic frameworks for digital technology in particular to be entered onto to make procurement by NHS customers easier. But it's still a challenging space. And I think one of the bars is you really need to have evidence that your product works at a decent scale before you're going to get onto any of these procurement frameworks. So that initial battle to get your initial bit of data that this actually works is good for patients and has a value proposition that can be created that looks attractive to a potential customer is still one of those challenges that need to be overcome. And I think that, there's no easy solution to that. It's about engaging with the system where you can, where there are, and that's been difficult over the last 18 months. There's not been as many events. It's been harder to network, but I think as slowly as those sort of events start to re-emerge, and again, look to your HSNs for the opportunities to do that, then I think we will try and help you create those interactions with NHS professionals where you can try and build those early relationships that we can help catalyze and drive forward to help build that initial evidence base that starts to help you with your value proposition and your journey into the market at scale.
Does that feel like it's a bit of a domino effect? I've worked with different organisations selling into the NHS, and one particularly springs to mind, going back a number of years, and it took them 3.5, 4 years to get their first NHS client, and then they had 10 within the next 18 months with a sort of a domino. Is that still the way that it works without central procurement, individual trusts purchasing individual solutions, or what's your view on that?
Well, I think if you're in an NHS organization and you're being approached about procuring a new digital technology and you're a little bit nervous about it, there's no better recommendation than one that comes from your peer up the road who's already taken a bit of a gamble perhaps on a technology and was able to pick up the phone and tell you this works and this is how we got it to work. And I think that second bit's really, really important, Nick, as well, because quite often with technology, it's quite easy to establish that it does work. The challenge sometimes is getting it into a system and making it work within the system that's there. And that's often what those procurement professionals are interested in understanding. They kind of assume that it will work, but what are the challenges of getting it to implementing this new technology? What do we have to change in this pathway to make this work? What are we going to turn off eventually if we're turning this on? So those are not easy things to talk about until you've got that first or second customer, right. But you really need to build out from there, with the rest of your strategy into that market.
I'll pick up on that with Richard in a second, but that takes us back to the very first question, I guess, doesn't it, about the pace of change and the willingness of people to be more open to new digital health technology. So in some respects, it's probably a good time to revisit. If you've got a health technology that has been banging against a bit of a semi-closed door, maybe a good time to revisit it now, given the openness of the trust and to be looking for that kind of solution, I guess.
I think you're right, Nick, as well, but I think just banging your head against the same old door in the same old way would probably get you the same result. Thinking about how you might pivot what you're doing to some of the immediate needs of the service now. And we've seen that quite a lot across the whole innovation ecosystem as innovative innovators have pivoted towards some of the challenges that COVID has thrown up to the NHS, and being able to articulate how your innovation can help with that is really helped. So really focusing on, for example, well, we know there's a massive elective waiting list now. So if you had an innovation that tackled waiting lists 18 months ago, now that problem is, monumentally more significant, then really making a play on that would be a sensible thing to do. And that's a very crude, obvious example, but there are lots of innovations out there that have pivoted towards COVID, over the last 18 months and made a successful transition to serving the new needs that have emerged over the last 18 months.
Okay, Richard, working with innovators and entrepreneurs, and obviously being part of an innovation studio at PDM, what's your view on that kind of approach and the whole kind of pandemic pivot and those kind of discussions?
Yeah, I think getting a product into the NHS has been notoriously difficult, and I think that in general terms there needs to be an awareness of the innovators that it's going to be a tough journey, as Neville alluded to. I guess the other thing is, just because there's an innovation which is exponentially better than an existing product within the NHS or service, it will take time for that to be adopted. And I think there needs to be an awareness, from the outset. As Neville mentioned, it's about kind of connecting with people, getting early adopters to get some efficacy, to demonstrate that it works, and that's the most important and critical thing in the journey. But as we know, the AHSN is it exists to help with that journey from innovators into the NHS. I think without the AHSN, it would be a lot more difficult. I think in terms of the answer about the COVID thing, I probably observe that I'm not sure if things are going to be easier or more difficult to get into the NHS, but I think that COVID has now presented a bit of a catalyst for change. It's shown that it can be reasonably agile as an organisation. So I think that the entry points now are slightly different from what they were before. And I think it's down to the entrepreneur or the innovators to kind of find out what the route into the NHS is through the academic health science networks, and as I say, demonstrating efficacy. You know, just because it's a great idea and will save the money NHS, it will not be instantly adopted. So I think there are multiple challenges, not just about the innovation itself.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on a point you mentioned earlier as well, Neville, going back to, you know, how's this going to work in practice, really? From the Studio podcast, we're aware of, I guess, some integration issues, particularly with app technology and the NHS platforms. How can that be resolved, and what, if anything, can be done to overcome some of those challenges? Because the NHS is a massive beast, isn't it, with some massive software platforms that I guess you've got to integrate with. If that's a difficult challenge for the app developers, what can be done?
So I think you're right, Nick. That remains a challenge, particularly in the digital space as well. But it cannot be ignored. You absolutely have to ensure that your app is integratable into the NHS systems, and that means you need to be working to the right standards. I think the FHIR standard is kind of the baseline in that context, and I think if you're working to that standard, then what you're essentially doing is you're creating a 3-pin plug. You just need to find where the 3-pin socket is. But when you find it, you can plug it in. And you need to be thinking about that right from the start. So data safety, data handling, information governance, all of those issues need to be part of your planning right at the start. Even if you're not quite sure where you're going to plug in, working to those standards will mean that whenever you're talking to somebody in procurement and you're asked that question, you're able to answer, yes, I've developed this product at the right standards. Show me where the plug socket is.
But also making sure that your plug is 3-pin circular or 3-pin rectangular, and not the fact that it's just a 3-pin plug is essential, I guess, on that basis. Richard, Innovation Studio like PDM sat somewhere in between client, NHS, you know, and other service providers. How do we view potential integration challenges? You know, can we find some wins? What advice do we give our clients? Is there anything different to add to what Neville said? I like the 3-pin plug analogy. I think everybody will get that one. It's fairly straightforward. Anything to add to that, Richard, on that point?
I think my only comment on that is that, you know, these are interesting times for various reasons. I think the other point is, just because it's possible to innovate something, it doesn't mean that you actually should. The key is to focus on the user and the value of the innovation to them. I think a lot of people get really focused and kind of engrossed in the technology of what it is, as opposed to what it actually does. So I think where the possibilities are is to think about the user journey, the value to the user, how it differentiates, and to start almost from to establish what good looks like and kind of work it backwards. That for me is where real innovation should be nurtured.
Well, for those who are watching, you can see Neville nodding. Those who are on audio, Neville was nodding to that. So that seems like we're on the same wavelength with that one. Question for Neville, going back to something Richard mentioned about telehealthcare. You know, Zoom GP appointments and Zoom assessments, etc. Is that now here to stay, as far as you can see? And, you know, if so, we've done this as a result of COVID, but we've now got 3 to 5 years, probably more of a plan. What does the next 3 to 5 years look like from a telehealthcare perspective, if it's indeed here to stay?
So I think there are elements of telehealthcare that are definitely here to stay. I'm not sure how many GP appointments, for example, in primary care are done over Zoom. I think a lot of them are now done over the phone, and I think that's fine. And I think that, you know, that will grow. I think one of the things that we need to be careful of in this space as well is making sure that by using these technologies, we're not excluding members of society who aren't maybe as technologically or as economically well off as the rest of us as well. And I think one of the things that we've uncovered over the last 18 months is this idea of almost digital poverty. We cannot expect all of our people across, all of our citizens across all of our nation to be able to afford to expend their entire data allowance on a Zoom call. So we need to really be thinking, and this goes back to Richard's point about getting the user-centered design right. So we really need to be thinking hard about getting that design right so that our citizens and our patients can engage with these digital technologies on an equitable way and all benefit equitably from that as well. So I think there's something to be thought about there as well. I think in terms of telehealth, where we need to go is we need to be combining, remote consultation with remote diagnostics. And again, Richard's mentioned this as well, bringing digital and technology together. I think that's where the real value is going to be over the next 3 to 5 years. It's as easy for me to do this call with the video turned off as it is with the video turned on, and it won't eat up as much bandwidth. So in primary care, a lot of those calls are happening, by phone. Where it will improve is if we have the digital technology that if you're on video, I can diagnose, I can get some really useful clinical diagnostic information from the video call that is useful to me and to the patient. So can I take your pulse? Can I get your respiration rate? Can I tell if your blood glucose sugar is dipping on this call? Just using camera technology, or maybe we add in some technology that you have at home for a while whilst we're doing this. I think that's where the real opportunity is, that combining remote diagnostics and remote consultation into one unified service where the data that is generated automatically drops into my electronic patient record as well, without any sort of third party, typing, et cetera. That's, I think, where the future will take us. And it's here in some cases, but it's not universal. And I think that's a really exciting space as we move forward over the next 3 to 5 years. But we've got to keep that equity of access. And we've really got to be thinking about, doing this and not increasing health inequalities, but really trying to address them through doing this stuff as well. So I think there's some really important points there that we can maybe talk a little bit more about. But I think, Richard's point earlier on about getting the users involved right at the start, that's a really good sign that you're thinking in the right way.
Excellent. Richard, I know you're sort of a massive advocate of a level playing field. And, I know you've got some concerns potentially that we've discussed privately around, two-tier healthcare for those with the digital access and those without. What's your view then, and what's your, I guess, final word on this, really, given where we are with the conversation?
My concern is that it's very easy to get carried away with the technology because it's there. But as I mentioned earlier, just because you can, it doesn't mean that you actually should. So I think as a society, we should be prepared for inclusivity and understand what that looks like. Sure, there are early adopters who will have 5G, 6G, 7G connection, who will embrace technology. They'll be the people that are very comfortable with it. Not everybody will still want to have a telehealth consultation. You will still have an area of society that will want to go to a physical GP. And I think it's how we cater for that. So my biggest concern is a two-tier health system. And I think what we need to be doing as we are, embracing Industry 4.0 and digitization, at the same time, we should also be thinking seriously about the implications of that and how do we manage that? What's the mechanism by which those that don't want to adopt those technologies have the same level of care as those that do adopt it? And I think they're the interesting things that are kind of going to throw up over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think we need to be really enabled about what we're doing. So I think there needs to be infrastructure in place. And I think it's all about talking to the user. What works for them, what would they be happy to do, and then design and create systems around that. Okay, thank you. Final question, Neville, just a bit of it's not a trick question really. What's in your inbox for 2021, 2022? What's on your to-do list then that's front and center of your thinking right now?
So apart from getting into a club in Ibiza with Richard, I would have to say on the work front, I think it's that idea of making sure that we build inclusive digital transformation into our approach, particularly to digital technology and health over the next 12 to 18 months. In fact, beyond that, if we get that right, if we start thinking right from the get-go about that inclusiveness around our digital transformation agendas, then I think we will serve our citizens really, really well. We will start to generate technology that serves all of their needs really well. And that's going to require some different approaches. And I think Richard's, addressed some of that as well by bringing those people closer to us as innovators, as people working in the system, to really understand how we address some of their challenges and how can we get on top of that and really work with them to give the best opportunities, for them to thrive in the space that they're in.
Excellent. Sounds like you've got a full agenda to look forward to on that one then, Neville, no problem. So that's been from the studio, our podcast from PDM International. Our details are on the holding slide at the end, and contact details will be in the show notes. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much to Neville for a fantastic set of insights into the whole aspect around digital healthcare and digital technology. And thanks, Richard, for co-hosting. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.